Hey folks, we're about ready to get all set here. Wow, that didn't make any sense at all. We're about ready to start. I know, early for me too. And kind of strange, kind of cloudy out, so I feel like it's not even quite daytime yet. I want to make sure you can see and hear me, so do me a favor if you would, and let me know if you can see and hear me. Chime in and let me know if you can see and hear me okay. Ah, awesome. All right. Looks like we're good then. Okay. I have got 8:30, so with that, oh, wrong account? Oh, I guess maybe the wrong account you signed in on. That's okay. Anna, fantastic. Looks like we can start up then. I'm going to go ahead and reduce this. Um okay. This week, you get some of my absolute favorite readings. Just to give you a little, hint to that, if I were writing the Renaissance paper, the personal Renaissance paper that you have to write here at the end of the semester, in which you have to take some readings and kind of say how they affected you, how they changed your thinking, how they influenced you. Well, if I were writing that paper, these readings would be in that paper. They really affected me profoundly when I first came across them 6 or 7 years ago. So, with that, let's go ahead and jump in. What we are looking at today is we're looking at basically three readings. The first two are really don't worry, all three are fascinating, but the first two kind of go hand in hand. It's The Dependence Effect by Galbraith, and then we're going to be talking about Pecuniary Emulation by Veblen. And that is from his book, Theory, you can't see it right here, I'm sorry, Theory of the Leisure Class, we get to play with. So just a quick little sort of context, setting the stage for these readings. Of course, at the beginning of the semester, we talked about, well, what is a business transaction? And what we found was a business transaction is any time that we exchange goods or services because I have an excess of a good or service, but I am in want of a different good or service. So we trade because you stand in need of of a good or service that I have in excess. You have in excess a good or service that I stand in need of. So hey, what do you say we trade, and that way we both benefit? That's a business transaction. We also learned a little bit from Plato and the Republic, the idea that, well, business transactions and profit are all fantastic, but I want you to hearken back to the idea that he wasn't so keen on the idea of retail, and that retail really didn't offer any substantial value. These are some themes that are going to be coming up today, because what happens now is we are now entering into a consumer economy. Remember, we started generally, then we went into capitalism, and we're still totally capitalism. But we are now in a full-fledged consumer economy. Now, that's not just a word I made up. That is the official title of the type of economy in which we live today. And the idea of this economy is it can only work and can only grow and can only be successful if we consume. And therefore, we need to make consumption a central part of this economy. And the readings that we're going to look at today kind of talk about how we created this world in which consumerism is the key element. So, with that, let's start with Galbraith and the dependence effect. Oh, that's not the one I want. This one. There we go. Okay. Hey, so let me ask you something. How many pairs of shoes do you have? Now, if we were in a classroom, we'd go ahead and write this up on the board and so forth. I'll tell you what, I have around 4 to 6 pairs of shoes, speaking for myself. Okay? Some of you might have more, some of you might have less. I'm willing to bet there's nobody with just 1 pair of shoes. We'll come back to that. How about hats? Well, for me, I have about 7 to 9 hats. And in fact, it might even be a little bit more, but 7 to 9 that I can really think of. The funny thing is, guys, I don't even really wear hats that much. So why do I have 7 to 9 hats? We'll talk about that. Jackets. What about jackets? How many jackets do you have? Well, I have about 4 to 6 jackets. And, all right, some of you might have more or less. Okay, bags. This is the one I have just for me here, because when it comes to bags, backpacks, handbags, man purses, satchels, you name it. When it comes to bags, I probably have about 3 dozen bags. At least. I might have more. So here's the question. Why do I have so many jackets and hats? I don't even wear hats. I'm looking right up here on a shelf behind me, and I have about 4 or 5 hats sitting up there. I don't wear them. Why do I own so many hats? Why do I have so many bags? Okay, well, let's continue on. I want you to think about your cell phone. How old is your cell phone? You know, less than 3 months, 6 months, a year, so on and so forth. And why did you replace it? Well, in my particular case, my phone is less than a year old, and I replaced it because the last one died. The battery couldn't even hold the charge for 2 hours. So I finally replaced it. Although I would like to call out, I couldn't just replace the battery, right? That would make too much sense. Hold on to that idea. So here's the question. Why do I have so many hats when I don't wear them? Why do I have 3 or 4 dozen bags? And why did I have to buy a new phone because my battery couldn't hold the charge? Why couldn't I just replace the battery? You can replace a battery in flashlights. Why can't you replace it in a phone? And of course, you have your own answers to these questions. Well, that brings us to Galbraith and the dependence effect. Here's what Galbraith says in the reading that you have this week. He says, listen, there's this kind of neoclassical view of economics. And this neoclassical view, he says, is that consumer demand drives production. And he says it's pretty darn simple. As consumers want more and more of something, the industry will produce more and more of that something. And if consumers don't want it, industry will stop producing it. Now, this idea is true. It holds water. It's correct. I'll give you some examples here. Google Glass. Do you know why you can't get Google Glass? Because nobody wanted it. You see that kid there with kind of FaceTime doing video chat like much we're doing right now, or with Zoom? Everybody's on Zoom now because we're working remotely. That technology has been around for like 4 decades. I'm not kidding. It's been around for 4 decades. But it's only been in the last 10 years that it's taken off and that people have been open to it. And yet, there's all kinds of examples of things that really took off, the iPod, or didn't take off at all. And right now we're kind of seeing this view as well. I mean, everybody is making face masks. Everybody is making ventilators because there is a huge demand for these things, and so production is going that way. So that neoclassical view holds water. However, Galbraith says that's not the model that really, truly drives our economy at large. This is what he says. He says that it's not the consumer who dictates the terms of industrial system, but rather the companies that produce and market the goods and services. So these companies manufacture an abundance of contrived wants, which they then market heavily. I want you to really focus on this idea of contrived wants. Have you ever, and for me, and actually if you follow me sometime on Instagram, I actually put a lot of pictures of things that I think were contrived wants for me. Have you ever seen something that you didn't even know existed, but as soon as you saw it, you thought, I need that? Not, I want it, or that's interesting. You actually thought, I need that. You didn't even know it existed 5 minutes ago, and now you need it. Galbraith talks about contrived wants and contrived needs, which we'll come to in a moment, that you didn't even know you wanted it until you saw it. So I'll give you some examples. There in the picture, I have decorating for Halloween. Your parents, let alone your grandparents, decorating for Halloween was not a thing. That was not a thing at all. And yet now decorating for Halloween is kind of a big deal. Of course, we've got holiday shopping and so forth. Now, this St. Patrick's Day was kind of weird because of COVID-19. We didn't really celebrate St. Patrick's Day. But trust me, in one of these days, I'll show a graph. The consumer spending, the spending on St. Patrick's Day items are going up and up and up because, advertisers are marketing this idea of St. Patrick's Day. Matching pajamas at Christmas? Oh my gosh, that's huge. Fireworks are one of my favorite because all you're doing is lighting the damn things on fire. So, for those of you playing at home, let me explain. You take your money, you buy a firework, and you light it on fire. Well now, why not eliminate the middleman and just light your money on fire? That's all you're doing. And yet we spend tons of money on this. Now, my favorite here is that potty putter, okay, where a person is putting there at the toilet. The reason it's my favorite is I just put that there as kind of this extreme sort of vile example of just contrived wants. Except I have had in my history 2 students in 2 different classes go, yeah, I've got one of those. They're always given as gag gifts, okay? Now, I want you to think about this. This is something that is very particular to this consumer economy. We need to create demand even when it's not there originally. Now, we're going to share some quotes from Victor LeBeau. Victor LeBeau is not in the readings. However, his quotes, I think, really help to illuminate why we created this economy that we did. This is something he said in 1955. He's an economist. Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, worn out, replaced, and discarded at an ever-increasing rate. Now, here's the thing. This is 1955. We've just come out of World War II. And we are really good at producing. We're really good at producing. And we need the economy to grow. Well, we can't build tanks and planes anymore. So we got to build something. So we need people buying. And the thing is, we need them always buying. When you hear about things like gross domestic product, GDP, and so forth, That's saying how productive we are, what our consumer spending is and so forth, quarter after quarter, month after month, year after year. So he's saying in order for us to continue to grow, we need to make consumption our way of life. Now, see what he says here, that we convert buying and use of goods into rituals. Well, what are rituals that we, is part of, how do we use consumerism as a ritual? Well, I'll give you an example. Have you ever thought, gee, I'd really like to go on a date, but I'm broke? Well, why is it that you need to spend money on a date? You want to be with the person. Why does money enter into it? Well, because it is part of our ritual. It's part of the expectation. There's this kind of sense that if you cannot afford to go on a date, then you may not be as desirable of a mate as somebody who can really afford to go on a date and wine and dine the person and do fun things and so forth. And so that is ritual. What about retail therapy? Have you ever practiced retail therapy, gone shopping when you're feeling low? I sure have. That's ritual. Or how about in giving of gifts and baby showers and so forth? These are all ways in which we have, turned consumerism into a part of ritual. What about spiritual satisfaction? Well, think about, say, Christmas, okay? Every single Christmas they say, hey, remember, Christmas isn't about giving gifts and, commercialism and so forth. It's about, quiet, contemplative, peaceful, religious reasons. And it's like, no, it's not. Christmas is all about buying and spending now. It just is. If you ever wonder, why is it called Black Friday? Well, it's called Black Friday because many, many, many businesses make like 60% of their revenue for the year, the 6 to, 8 weeks before Christmas. So it's when their books turn from red, meaning they're in debt, to black, meaning they're making profit. So Black Friday is when you start to actually make money through the year. So this is what LeBeau here is talking about. Now, he says things consumed, burned up, worn out, replaced, and discarded at an ever-increasing rate. Let me show you some things, or ever-increasing pace. Let's talk about obsolescence. Now, there's two types of obsolescence that we see in our, economy today. One is planned obsolescence and the other is perceived obsolescence. Now, planned is where we actually make a product that's only intended to last for so long, and then it is going to die and you will need to replace it. Now, the example I have here is the printer. Consider how many of you have printers, computer printers, that don't work. And yet, in the past, they're changing this a little bit right now, but in the past, when you've gone to refill the ink cartridges, you become aware that it's actually cheaper to buy a new printer than it is to replace the ink cartridges. All right? That's nuts, but that's planned obsolescence. The idea that a phone battery can only last for so long, and once the phone battery dies, you need to replace the whole phone. Well, why not just replace the battery? No, because then we would not be consuming as much. We need to make sure that people are replacing the whole phone, not just the battery. Now, there's many, many, many examples of planned obsolescence, but this is a real thing. The idea that manufacturers need to make their products good enough that they last long enough that when they break, you feel like replacing it, but not so long that it never breaks, because then you wouldn't replace it. Then we have perceived obsolescence. Perceived obsolescence is they still work perfectly well, whatever it is you bought, but it's not fashionable. It just isn't, it's not what I want anymore. It's not me. It doesn't reflect me, and so on. So remember, think about shoes, for example. How many pairs of shoes you own? Well, and remember, we talked about shoes when with Aristotle. Plato and the Republic, where he was using shoes as an example of something that should just be used. Well, how many of pairs of shoes that you own are really worn out? I mean, really, really worn. You might have one or two pair that are just like really your go-to pair, your working pair, but you probably have 6 or 7 pairs of shoes, I do, that are pretty close to mint, and yet we'll still buy another pair of shoes. Now, in the old days, you used to take your shoes and get them resold. You wouldn't replace a pair of shoes when they wore out. You would get them resold. Well, now we replace a pair of shoes when we don't like the color and when we don't like the design. That is perceived obsolescence. Okay? And then we have one thing that, Galbraith talks about is the idea of wants asserting themselves as needs. Now, this works in the best interest of an economy because if you want something, you could put it off. I don't need it. I want it, and so I kind of think one of these days I'll pick it up and get one of those, but it's not like I need it. Well, an economy that's based on consumerism doesn't want to hear that. They want to hear you say, I need it. And so what happens is marketing and advertising and economic forces, cause us to look at wants and perceive them as needs. So wants asserting themselves as needs. I'll give you an example for myself. Here in Utah, we have the parade of homes every year. You go off and look at all these different places and so forth. I don't go to the parade of homes. I've never gone. I never will. Never say never. But I have no intention of going to the parade of homes. The reason is I really love my home. It fits my needs. It's a wonderful home and so on and so forth. And yet, there's somebody down the street who has the exact same floor design as I do. Cookie cutter homes out here, right? He has the exact same floor design, and he extended his bedroom, and it's marvelous. It's really awesome. And I came home after looking at what he did, and I looked at my bedroom, and for the first time, I was dissatisfied. And I'm like, hold on, wait. I've loved my home for 15 years. I've never had a complaint. And yet, all I do is see what somebody else has done, and then I come home and I am dissatisfied. I'm like, I'm not going down that path. And I know that if I went to Parade of Homes, I would just come home and look at my home and say, this is a frickin' hobble. What am I doing living in this shack? I am a failure. Okay? Which is actually then going to bring us to our next reading. So it's wants asserting themselves as needs. Sounds shallow, but there's some good stuff to it. So we're going to talk about that. So that wraps up the dependence effect with Galbraith. However, the thing is, hang on. This loops very well, and I know you can't hear me as well, I'm sorry. This loops very well into pecuniary emulation by Veblen. And it's same sort of topic, but with a different twist. So earlier I was saying, you've got 6 or 7 pairs of shoes. I've got a whole bunch of hats that I never wear. I have a whole bunch of jackets and shoes and so forth. Why do you wear what you wear? Why are you wearing what you're wearing? So, for example, some of you might be in your pajamas right now because I can't go out. And if I can't go out, why change out of my pajamas? Well, that's an interesting question. Why don't you wear just pajamas? Why do you wear what you wear? Now, you might be thinking it's like, well, it keeps me warm, it keeps me covered, and I mean, you have to wear clothes and so on and so forth. No, because if that were the case, then you would buy one set of clothes, maybe 2 or 3, so that you could do laundry, and you would just wear the same thing over and over, and it would be the same stuff you wore in the 70s. You wear these clothes for different reasons, and I want to talk about that. I keep doing that. There we go. So, Veblen talks about pecuniary emulation. Now, these are 2 words that maybe you haven't heard much. You've heard them, but maybe not a whole lot. So let's break it down a little bit. Pecuniary means for sort of, how do I put it? Superficial financial reasons. You know, you're being superficial, not very deep, and not very thoughtful about money. You're just kind of, being, gaudy with it. Emulation means to copy, to mimic, to mirror. So pecuniary emulation says we want to keep up with the Joneses. We want to be perceived as financially successful as these people because we say they are financially successful. So, for example, I want to wear Adidas because Beckham wears Adidas and Beckham is really successful. I want to wear a Tiger watch. I don't, but, because I want to be perceived as successful like Leonardo DiCaprio. The idea is that we want to fit into society. We want to be perceived as successful, as intelligent, as well off. And therefore, we are going to dress and wear and do what people who have been deemed by society to be successful do what they do. So if I wear the sneakers that, whomever, who LeBron James wears, if I wear the sneakers that LeBron James wears, then I am saying I am part of that tribe. I am successful and aspirational in that way. Now, we all do this. We all do this to varying degrees. But whenever you wear a logo on your clothing, the manufacturer is not paying you to wear that logo. In fact, you paid them. You paid the manufacturer for the rights to wear their logo. And by wearing the logo, you are saying, I am part of this tribe. By wearing, if we were in a classroom right now, and I want you to think about this, if we were in a classroom right now, you would notice a lot of these kind of beards. Check out Beckham right there. Check out Leonardo DiCaprio. Check out, actually the only guy I care about there. Oh gosh, what's his name? Anyway, right? This is kind of in this sort of look. I didn't say I was immune to this. And so this is us kind of saying we want to be, perceived and assimilated, perceived as part of this tribe. Take, for example, these glasses. This is a true story, okay? I'm going to show you something here. That's not what we want, Lon. We want this one. I'm sorry, folks. Bear with me. I'll get my act together eventually. Here we go. Okay. You see this style of glasses? I used to hate this style. I thought it was the lamest, dorkiest, nerdiest style I've ever seen. Until I saw pictures of an author that I really like. I like Chuck Palahniuk. I like his books a lot. He wrote Fight Club. He wrote a whole bunch of other books. And check out his glasses. Well, my friends, I saw these pictures and I thought, well, he's a cool writer. I want to be a cool writer. And all of a sudden, I liked that style. And I bought that style. I'm telling you, this is because of pecuniary emulation. Now, don't get me wrong, I really like the style now, but I maintain I like the style because of pecuniary emulation. And there are things that you like because, well, somebody else wears it and I want to kind of be part of that. Now, there's another concept that Veblen talks about, and that is conspicuous consumption. Now, he does not talk about it in this particular reading, but it's a very important concept and is very Veblen-esque, so I want to bring it up. Conspicuous consumption, well, once again, let's talk about the definition there. Conspicuous means out in the open, sort of clearly obvious, but it's almost like somebody's trying to hide it, but they're not hiding it, and it's kind of glaring. So when somebody is conspicuous, they're clearly standing out from the crowd and drawing attention, even though maybe they don't want to, but they're conspicuous. Consumption is, of course, consumption. Conspicuous consumption is saying, listen, I want to be perceived as successful. I want to be perceived as intelligent and reliable and trustworthy and as somebody you want to, give money to in support of a business, for example. Therefore, I am going to spend and wear as somebody who is successful. So when somebody is wearing this, I really like this watch. I really like this watch. I told you I wasn't really interested in a Tag Earl. I'm totally interested in this Breitling. It's only $35,000, so I don't know what's stopping me. But somebody who wears this watch, somebody who drives this car or lives in this home or has this yacht and so on and so forth, they're doing it because they want to be seen. They want to be perceived as immensely successful. Now, all these people might be riding on a $100,000 debt for all we know, but we tend to look at these things and associate them with success. So these are things that Veblen said about this. Now, I want to call out, Veblen talks in kind of some old world, even though he's not old world, I don't know, he's 1920s and 30s, a little difficult to understand. So we're going to work through these. Okay. So how does a person in today's world show others that he or she is successful? The motive that lies at the root of ownership is emulation, meaning I'm owning this and wearing it and driving it because I want to be perceived like somebody else. I want to keep up with the Kardashians. I want to keep up with the Joneses. And the same motive of emulation continues active in the further development of institution to which it has given rise and the development of all those features of social structure which this institution of ownership touches. What does that mean? It means our whole flippin' economy is built around this idea of emulation. It means that marketers and advertisers know darn well that you want to be perceived as successful like so-and-so, and so they are going to market to us in a way that tells us you will be successful like so-and-so. They'll even get endorsements from so-and-so. And when, Michael Jordan holds up Hanes underwear, I know that's an old example. I'm an old man, leave me alone. But when he holds up a pair of underwear and says, I wear Hanes, Where in the world do we think that Michael Jordan knows more about underwear than I do? We don't. But I want to be like Mike. Okay? So we have a whole system that's built around telling us you're not good enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not smart enough, you're not wealthy enough. You need to buy this so that you can, at the very least, be perceived as these things. Okay? So, moving on with Veblen's quote here. The possession of wealth confers honor, we perceive. It is an invidious, meaning causing resentful harm or envy, distinction. Nothing equally cogent, meaning rational, can be said for the consumption of goods, nor for any conceivable incentive to acquisition, and especially for the incentive to accumulation of wealth. In other words, we purchase for bling. It's all about how we are perceived. So, for example, when I have 3 or 4 dozen bags, well, I have bags that kind of go with different outfits and go with different needs and meet different criteria. I have a triathlon bag that I would never use as a backpacking bag. I have a motorcycle bag that I use only on my motorcycle. I have a computer bag that I use only for a certain kind of computer, not another computer. This is all showy. This is all sort of emulation. And so when we try to bling ourselves out, we're asserting ourselves as successful. Now, here's what by the way, this is another quote from Victor LeBeau. Let's read what he says about this. The measure of social status, of social acceptance, of prestige is now to be found in our consumptive patterns. The very meaning and significance of our lives today expressed in consumptive terms. In other words, if you're going to be successful in this society, you better consume the right things and be seen in the right things. The greater the pressure upon the individual to conform to safe and acceptable social standards, the more does he tend to express his aspirations and his individuality in terms of what he wears, drives, eats, his home, his car, his pattern of food serving, his hobbies. Okay? So you might think you golf because you enjoy golf. You golf because it is a tribe. You know, all these sort of things. Okay, here's what I want to come around to is all of this sounds really shallow. But, and it is, I mean, it is shallow. But is it all shallow? Well, I want to go back to something that Galbraith said that we did not cover because I wanted to hit it here. He said, who can say for sure that the deprivation which afflicts him with hunger is more painful than the deprivation which afflicts him with envy for his neighbor's new car? Here's what he's saying. We have psychological needs, just as in we have nutritional and physiological needs. Now, when our physiological needs are not met, we are hungry and we are afflicted. Well, we also have psychological needs. And when our psychological needs are not met, we are afflicted and we seek to alleviate that affliction. And so, what are we trying to do when we're wearing the right things and saying the right things and watching the right shows and driving the right cars? We're trying to say, I'm successful and I'm part of the group. And that's actually really important. It's very important for us. We are a social organism. We are a social species. And we need one another. We really, really, really need one another. I'm doing this overall. I'm using microphones. I'm using cameras. I'm using connectivity. I'm using YouTube. I didn't create any of this, but I need it. I need to be accepted in society. And in order for me to be successful in society, I need to be perceived as a contributing member of society. Well, what better way to be perceived as a successful, contributing member of society than by wearing the right clothes, watching the right shows, eating the right food, all that stuff. So, truth is, this is a normal driver because of who we are. And so, no, it's not all shallow. All right? So, just something to think about there. Now, here is my favorite way to end this little lecture here with Veblen. This is a quote from RuPaul back when on NPR. I forget the name of the guy who does RuPaul. I forget his name. Maybe somebody can text it to me. Fabulous insight here. This was an interview done on NPR, and this is what RuPaul said. You're born naked, and the rest is drag. Drag is what you put on after you get out of the shower. We're all playing these roles, you know. Even as a kid, I remember thinking, why aren't we talking about the fact that everyone's playing a role? I couldn't get anyone to break the fourth wall and say, everyone's playing a role, right? You see this. Dang straight. Think about it. When you wear what you wear, do your hair the way you do your hair, put your makeup on the way you do your makeup, and wear the brands and so on and so forth, you are playing a role. You want to be perceived as a certain kind of person. And the reason you might be in your pajamas right now because you're not going out is because I'm not on stage. I'm still in my trailer. You know, it's not time for me to go out on stage. As soon as I go out on stage, I'll go ahead and do my hair, put on my makeup, put on my clothes, brush my teeth, so on and so forth. But until then, yeah, I'm in my PJs. So just a thought there. Okay, that's our second reading. We've got one more that I want to go over. So bear with me just a moment. And we will pull up excerpt from Diogenes, Book 3. Oh my gosh, doesn't that sound exciting? We're just going to touch upon this real quick. I'm going to give you the key points of this reading. What he basically comes down to, I keep doing that, I've got to remember, is, and we're not going to go over this. It really comes down to the question of ethical dilemmas and honesty. Now, an ethical dilemma is, if you will, damned if you do, damned if you don't. There's just no one good answer. There are plenty of, it's not that it's legal or illegal. So, for example, I will come to this one slide. A value is a personal judgment, like I always try to tell the truth. And then we have morals. These are where things like religion has kind of codified the value for the entire community. So, thou shalt not bear false witness. Once again, a whole community says, hey, this truth-telling thing, that's actually really good for the community. We're going to codify it so that everybody is expected to follow it. And then we have laws which, come with consequences. We can enforce a law and we can assert consequences. And so in this case, we have laws regarding libel, slander, and perjury. But ethics are just, what's the right thing to do given the circumstance and what's at stake? And so The example I like to give here is, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. Now, if you're curious about that, research that. It's a great little story. But it basically comes down to a newspaper editor telling a little girl in print that there is a Santa Claus. Well, not to, shatter any dreams out there or anything, but there's no Santa Claus. So he did not tell the truth. He bore false witness, and because he put it in print, he printed libel. And yet it was the ethical thing to do. And, we could talk about that at a later time. But ethical dilemmas are like, well, what do you do when no option really looks perfect? Well, I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story about years and years and years and years ago. 30 years ago, I'm selling this little Ford Escort. It's not that one, but it's that exact model, color, all that sort of stuff. I'm like 23 years old or something like that, and I'm trying to sell this car. And now, at one time, a couple years before, I had driven through basically a flood, and the head on top of the engine block warped. All right, you've got an engine block and then the head on top, and it just warped a little bit. So I took the head off, took it into a shop. They fixed the head, but in so doing, there was just like, a 0.5 millimeter too much gap between the head and the engine block. So we put a shim in there, and it worked great. Worked fantastic. We fixed the car. And so now, a few years later, I'm trying to sell the car. Now, just so you guys know, I'm hardwired to be honest and ethical. Now, I'm not saying I'm honest and ethical. I'm saying it's just my default setting. And so I tend to provide all the information I possibly can unsolicited. And so I'm showing off this car, and the guy's clearly interested. He's going through it. He's going to get it for, a kid or something. And we're about ready to close the sale. And I'm opening up the hood, and I'm showing him. I said, by the way, that gold shim you see right there, that's brass and so forth. At one point, the head warped, so I took it into the shop. We fixed it. We put in that shim. So if you ever wonder what that little gold line is, you can barely see it. Here, let me clean it for you to show you. Well, he looked at it and said, oh, so the engine's been worked on. And I said, well, yeah, but it works great. It's fantastic. And he didn't even say another word. He just walked away. Just walked away. And I'm like, well, crap. I'm 23 years old. I'm dead broke. I'm a college student. I work at night. I've got a wife and a new baby. I need to sell this car. And I felt that I was being totally up and honest and so forth. Well, the next person came a week later to look at the car. And this time I said, I'll answer any question you have. Here's the car. Drive it around the block. Open the hook, kick the tires, and I will answer any question you have. Truthfully, honestly, completely. But I did not volunteer information this time. I just said, ask me, I'll tell you. And he sold the car. I never told him about the head being warped. So now, I tell you that story because that story is exactly the story that happens in this reading with Diogenes and his pupil Antipater. They're talking about corn, but it's the same story as happened with me and the Ford. Diogenes says, hey, listen, when you're selling something, the seller must declare the defects of his wares as far as the law of the land requires. Otherwise, so long as he's not lying, he's entitled to sell the good, best price he can possibly get. He does not need to divulge any information that, the law doesn't require. He has every right to get the best prices he can. Whereas Antipater said, no, 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 no. All the facts must be revealed, and the purchaser must be as fully informed as the seller, including if there are lower prices somewhere. So, in the case of my Ford, my first approach was the Antipater approach. I divulged everything. I even went to extremes to point something out, and I lost the sale. My second approach was the Diogenes approach, which is ask me anything, I'll be completely honest. Here's the title, here's all the work orders. You ask, I'll tell you, whatever, okay? But I'm not going to volunteer anything that I don't have to. Well, now this is an ethical dilemma because some companies do follow Antipater. You know, you have, Progressive Insurance, who will publish the rates of other insurance companies. And we have companies that will go to extremes to be as transparent about their processes, about their product, about what other, manufacturers are doing and providing, so that they can be perceived as being completely upfront and trustworthy and so on and so forth. Whereas on the Diogenes side, well, now, if you've ever worked on commission, you ask a question, I'll answer it, but I'm really hoping to make the sale. Are you really going to, share everything that you possibly can about your product? Now, just one thing, and this will come up in the questions and so forth, quick little story. Pythias and the villa on the lake, on the fish-filled lake. This is a little story that, very interesting. I invite you to read it here. What it basically comes down to is Pythias was somewhat dishonest when he, sold this villa that he was selling, because he gave the impression that the lake that the villa was on was filled with fish. So, find that reading, find that particular story. You'll find it amusing. Now, on the surface, you'll say, well, Pythias was clearly unethical and was clearly dishonest. And by the way, yes, he was clearly unethical and clearly dishonest. But I want you to think about this. When you're trying to sell a home, and maybe you haven't tried to sell a home yet, but ask a realtor friend of yours, kind of a trick of the trade of selling a home is to bake cookies in the home so that before somebody comes to look at it, because you want them to smell cookies, right? Well, is that honest? That's just a little trick of the trade. It's not a big deal. It's not harming anyone. Okay. Well, what about if you are friends with the neighbor and there's some graffiti at a park that's just the next block over from your home? So you contact the mayor and ask them to have that graffiti removed so that when people are driving around your neighborhood and, kind of seeing the home and seeing the neighborhood, they don't see the graffiti. Is that okay? There's no real harm in it. This could go on. It can become a slippery slope. So as you read about Pythias and the villa, think about things that we might do to make a particular sale look more attractive than it truly is. Okay? And there you go, folks. Those are 3 readings, the 3 main readings that you'll want to take a look at this week. I am going to open things up for questions to see if, here we go. It's got to be one of these. There we go. Here's our chat window. I want to see if there are any questions, comments, anything like that before we wrap up today. So let's see what we have. And otherwise, if you don't have any questions or comments, we're all good and you're good to go. I'm going to wait just a moment while we see here. Hey, Nick. You betcha. Thank you. All right. Doesn't look like we have any questions. So, folks, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much for watching this video if you're watching it after the fact. And we'll talk to you again real soon. Have a fantastic day.